Ooh, that's fun. Hi everyone, it's Caleb and Gabby, and we just want to talk about event planning. Just like a quick, just like overview of event planning for this semester, and thinking about future semesters as situations are changing surrounding what we're allowed to do on campus versus what APO has put out those last few semesters, and then just thinking overall about how your chapter itself runs. Um, Obviously, you would know more about your chapters and what your chapters like, hopefully. So we just wanted to like get some input, talk about it, and hopefully get some discussion around it. So the first thing we want to talk about was chapter and ritual. So if you want to put it in the text box, or if you want to unmute if you can, how are you still doing chapter this semester? Are you doing it virtual, in person, hybrid? What is working for your chapters right now?
Hello everyone, my name is Kachi Jogo. I'm from the Alpha Iota chapter at Ohio State. So we've gone back to in-person chapters, and we noticed for the first about 3 chapters, we would have, let's say 50 to 60 brothers on Zoom and about 100 brothers in person. And at the end of chapter, this is something we noticed during COVID, but we didn't have a solution to it. At the end of chapter, when it's all done, there'll always be maybe like 15 accounts still on, so you could tell that they just weren't paying attention and they didn't realize chapter had ended. So we just started a new kind of rule and accommodation. It's like only 2 virtual chapters count towards the requirement of 10 total chapters. So that allows brothers who are, if they test positive for COVID or have to quarantine for whatever reason, they have like 2 chapters automatically excused. But so everyone is required to attend at least 8 chapters in person to count towards the requirement. So I think that's helped a lot. At our last chapter, we had a lot more people in person and a lot less people on Zoom. So that's worked. And for anyone who feels uncomfortable with coming to chapter in person, there's also like a special COVID appeal that they can make for their chapter requirements. So that's worked a lot, like just switching it. It's helped everyone kind of go off of the virtual because, it's kind of a lazy way to do chapter, and chapter is really important for that, you know, um, the bond that we're looking to form.
Yeah. And I mean, and it's also to think about like what is the purpose of chapter, and kind of like what you were saying, it's like a nice cop out, but how can they be engaged if they're not paying attention? Especially like I like how you said at the end of chapter, like after chapter was done, there was still accounts up. So that they weren't like either paying attention, or they left it on, or who knows. Like sometimes you got to give them the benefit of the doubt, but we all know sometimes you turn a camera on, you step out, and then you're gone. And then it looks like Christina's the president from the Right States petitioning group, and they are back in person as well, but they're struggling with attendance too. So yeah, thinking about like attendance, what, Kachi, do you feel like you've had an attendance issue since you have like moved the chapter back to being mostly in person?
I would Well, I don't know. I don't think so overall, because this past Monday was our first what's it called? Our first day enacting that rule of only 2 chapters count. I wouldn't say so. We had it in a different room than we usually do, so it was honestly kind of hard to gauge how if the crowd was like fuller than normal. But I don't think that we've had an issue. I think I'm sure you'll get to it eventually. I think it's like regular calendar events that we kind of noticed low attendance. But for chapter itself, I think for the most part people are it's something that people still look forward to, and people do come out quite a lot to chapter.
Yeah. Do you have any ideas for Christina, who is like their chapter is struggling with like attendance? Like what have you done to try to get like motivation back up, or get everyone more motivated to be back in person than when we were virtual for COVID?
Yeah, for sure. We always have, or not always, but we try to incorporate some chapter activities too. So we'll have chapter games on some chapters. I don't know if you guys have families. I'm sure you do, but I don't know how many families other chapters have. But we have 5 families in APO, and we'll just put up like a seating chart on the screen at the start of chapter, and brothers will sit by family, and we can have like a quick Kahoot game, and it it counts towards like family points that they can earn at the end of the year to like decide which family like wins family Olympics. So chapter games for sure. I know that at an earlier event on budgeting, I talked about how we fundraise and we do chapter raffles. So that's another thing. Like, well, we have a lot of extra merch left off from other semesters, so we'll provide the opportunity for brothers to like join a raffle and Venmo our director of fundraising, Elaine, who just left, some money to get entered to a raffle for the merch that we're raffling off. And what else do we do? So I said chapter games, the raffle, and then LFS. So it's like our LFS Brothers of the Week. We have at the start of the year, exec picks one brother who's like done amazing with like their leadership credits, fellowship, and service. And then from then on, those brothers will like nominate a different brother in the chapter to receive the LFS letters. And so we do a handoff. They're basically just like wood cut like LFS, and every week whoever is nominated and like is the LFS brother, they get to add like a little addition, I don't know, to whatever it is to the letter. I know like we volunteer with Hearts at Heart here in Columbus, which is a food pantry. So someone would put like a note from there on the letter. I remember for like fellowship, after we had our spring break trip, this was a couple years ago, someone put like, I don't know, kind of like a little like memory from ASB on the letters. So, and then when they're nominated, there's like a little slide of the brothers, and they just talk about, I don't know. I think we try to incorporate our brothers into every step of chapter, even though it's like the exec members who, run and like make their slides. We definitely try to incorporate like highlight brothers and like give them snaps. I know we do snaps at the end of chapter. And sorry, I know this is a lot, but there's one more thing that we do. Okay, and then we have like the pledge of the week slides incorporated into chapters. So each active is assigned a pledge who they have to meet with, sometime during the week, and they do an interview, and then they create a slide of that pledge and present it to chapter. So that's always something people want to come to chapter for, because you get to meet the pledges, and I don't know, like everyone's kind of incorporated into chapter, and I think that is what people look forward to.
One other thing you guys do, Kachi, that like you didn't bring up is that like I noticed this when I was on your chapters, that you called out the brothers that didn't come in person and said like, hey, like there really needs to be a reason why you're choosing virtual, and what is that reason. So like for like you, Christina, if you're offering both virtual and in person, and you want to make sure that you're calling out why people aren't coming in person, because they could be not feeling well, they could be uncomfortable being around people in person. That's totally fine, but there has to be a reason that's not just, well, I have a lot of homework, so I figured if I attended chapter virtually, I could actually just do my homework at the same time. So I was really appreciative of you calling that out, Kachi. Well, I don't think it was you specifically, but whoever called that out in chapter, because it kind of forces people to like come in person unless they actually really have a reason not to.
Yeah, and so to like wrap that up, like especially with chapters, and Christina, kind of going back to what Kachi was saying, it's finding those reasons and those ways to figure out what's going on in your chapter and like why are people not attending. So as like we talked, you might not have been here earlier, but Sabrina and I talked about like, maybe it's sending out a survey to see what they're looking for, or maybe figuring out ways that it's not always business, because chapters shouldn't always be business. You don't want to just go and listen to everyone talk and then leave and then that's it each week. But what can you kind of bring in, like kind of like what Kachi was going over, stuff that we've talked about the last few years with like membership, but how can you get, the brothers involved in chapter so it feels like it's something that they want to go to and not that, oh, it's just another meeting each week I have to go to and hear every position's updates. So yeah, maybe it's as easy as just sending out a survey saying like, hey, what are you looking to see, or why aren't you attending chapter? Is it, the day and time, or is it, any of the other factors that are coming in, and then working with those brothers to figure out a solution. Because really what that does is not only does it helps you, Christina, get some information, but it also makes them feel like they are getting involved more with the chapter planning. and it gives them an outlet to talk about things, and it feels more like close to those brothers who have things that might be going on that are keeping them from there. And I would say the same thing about rituals as well. So, moving back into in-person rituals, are you still doing accommodations for those who probably can't make it or would have issues? If I remember in the past, many chapters would have 2 to 3 pledge ceremonies, just because of, you might have someone who's not able to make it for class or work. And so you have 2 different ceremonies in 1 week. But another thing now that we've done virtual ceremonies is thinking about the students who may need to do an accommodation, have like a virtual one. So maybe you have an in-person one and a virtual one, just to, give yourself time to not have to go to a bunch of in-person things, but also accommodate those people as well. But yeah, like Hachi said, they always have makeup ritual and mandatory event excuses. So yeah, looking at ways that, using that within like accommodations that you might have to have for probably, I would say like at least this semester, next semester, you're still gonna have some students who may not be on campus, or may have, COVID as an excuse. I know most schools now are, requiring things like the vaccination, stuff like that. So that would still be, an issue. I work at a school that the first year students can elect to be fully online. So we're doing a lot of our events online too, still for at least 1 year. So that's something to think about as well. If you have students who may be virtual for the entire year, how do you accommodate them? And then talking about the same thing with your LFS events. So what has worked in your chapters, like in person or virtual, over the past semester? And Christine, if you want to type these in, and Kachi, if you want to talk or type them in, what kind of events have helped you?
As we've transitioned, back to this more in person, we definitely still offer a lot of virtual options still for our LFS events. So if brothers, it ties in with like their comfort level, and if on the off chance they test positive or exposed to COVID, they can definitely still work towards their requirements. If you look on our calendar, I would say it's a solid 85% in person and like 15% virtual. And I don't think that we have anyone who disagrees with that ratio. From the events I've been going to attending like recently, most of them in person. The general sentiment is that brothers are excited to be back in person and see each other face to face and kind of hang out while doing our LFS events and form those bonds. I think people really are appreciative of the in-person options and that we can kind of get closer back to normalcy. But our virtual events are usually full. I know we have a lot of leadership ones with just stuff that High State offers. So those are mostly virtual, and then we still have options for in-person leadership. And for fellowship events, I think we still incorporate some Zoom cookings here and there, but most of them are in person for now.
Yeah. So perfect. And like just thinking about like, when you're going through this event planning process, like, making sure that we're being open to both sides. So yes, we want to do that more in-person thing, but can we get the same results out of a service event that maybe is more online, or a student's doing on their own more, like outside hours and stuff like that, versus that in-person where they might be with other people. And then also just being really, really, thinking about the campus partners or the community partners that we have, like, are they still like allowing people on like into their service areas in person, or are they wanting more virtual opportunities as well? I think that's important. And still thinking about that purpose of LFS, like it's to really foster good leadership, providing service to our campus, our community, our fraternity, and the nation. And then fellowship is really getting that friendship piece out of it. But we want to make sure that when we're doing that event planning, that we're still thinking of not only that in-person or virtual, but kind of, if you think about like what we're talking about, like being inclusive as well. So if there's a chance that we can be look at a way of being more inclusive because we're planning an event in a different medium than we're used to, following through with that as well. And then also just thinking about like event planning, maybe you get your brothers more involved in the event planning and not doing as much exec stuff, because then they can kind of take that ownership over it as well. Like, yeah, it's going to be, Gabbie plans an event this semester. but she really wants to do it virtually. It's her event, so it takes that pressure off of, you know, the exec board, like, oh, it seems like you are only planning virtual stuff for this stuff, or you're only planning fellowships that are in person. It gets that pressure off of you all as well. And then the other thing I think about a lot with like event planning, especially this next semester or so, after the current semester, obviously spring, is when you're doing the event planning, are you thinking about, you know, if it's virtual, I should say, are you still have the same requirements, and are your requirements back to normal from when they like pre-COVID? And what is the consequence if they don't complete their hours? Like I advised OU's chapter, and they went completely back to their old hours pretty much, and back to regular. Like if you don't complete your hours, you know, this is what happens. You have to make them up the next semester. So I'm not sure. I know Christina, your group's still petitioning. But Kachi, have you thought about that as well? Like, do you feel like that's going to be an issue at the end of the semester?
Yeah, so we have, like, if brothers in a normal semester are not able to complete their requirements, they're basically on probation and have to make it up the next semester. And we had reduced credits during COVID, and we've gone back to our full credits, but the SA proposed, and all of exec voted to waive the probationary credits from last semester. So everyone's starting with a clean slate. And our hope is that with the clean slate, going back to virtual wouldn't be too drastic, because we are offering a bunch of opportunities to complete these credits. And so at the start of the school year, we do have Blue and Associate apps. So if anyone foresees that they won't be able to meet those requirements, they can apply for reduced membership requirements, and they almost always get approved. And we also have like a halfway Blue app too that's due at the end of October. So if, you know, during that time brothers can see that they won't meet the requirements, they can also apply for that. We had a lot of people apply for both Blue and Associates, so I can't foresee like a extremely high number of people going on probation at the end of this semester. And our hope is always that no one does. And that's something that, as the SA last year, I kind of made this very well known, because I feel like a lot of brothers didn't even know that these accommodations were available to them. So I think that it's definitely out in the chapter, and they know that if they're having a hard time meeting requirements, they can appeal to the SA, and there are a lot of options for them. So I don't think that it's something that we're going to see, you know, too much of brothers going on probation, because there's so many alternative options for them, and we have like things that they can do to avoid probation. So I don't know. I don't think it should be too much of a problem, but only time will tell.
Perfect. And then the last thing, I mean, this kind of is the same thing that we talked about, is it's the same with, I feel like, with pledge meetings as well, like making sure that pledges are getting, you know, involved in your activities as well, even if it is going to be like virtual pledge meetings or half and half. But I think most chapters are doing in-person pledge meetings, hopefully. But the same with like office hours. So if you are, you know, an exec who's doing office hours, being open to both virtual and in person, especially because office hours are really like just a time to check in. Like, does it make sense that you always have in-person office hours, or could those go virtual without, you know, getting the outcome that you need? And then the other thing is just inter-chapter. So I know that's something that we're going to be working on more, hopefully over the next semester or so, but can we do more inter-chapter events, you know, virtual and in person? I know they're hard to do virtual, but the basis is, you know, if you're trying to work with another chapter, so for instance, Wright State, if you're looking at working with like UD at all, like how can you, you know, at least like plant the seed maybe virtually, but you try to have some events that are in person if possible, and some maybe socially distant spaces if there's brothers who are concerned about being together. And the same with OSU, if you're thinking of having an event with another chapter in our section, so OU Lancaster, Capital, anything like that, you know, how can you still be following campus rules? Because we need to follow campus rules. That's, you know, those are the rules that are going to apply first before, you know, anything nationally. You have to follow whatever campus requires. But how can we still do those inter-chapter events and still get to meet other chapters? Obviously, things like this are helpful, but how could you now that so many schools have done virtual for so long, could you just like say like, hey, like let's have a virtual like game night or something like that, just to start planting those seeds and then getting like eased back into when hopefully we're like fully back in person and doing things like a real conference that's in person, or the regional conferences, sectional conferences, and just getting ready. Like I always say, it's going to be like an ease for a little bit until everyone is like fully in person. So thinking about that with event planning, this semester, next semester, is how can you start getting those little relationships built to hopefully flourish into more on-campus events, and getting brothers back in and easing in, so it doesn't feel like today we were virtual, but tomorrow you expect me to be fully in person now. That's all I have.
Are there any questions? Okay, so let's take about a 10-minute break. Get back on between like 3:35 and 3:40, and we'll start our risk management presentation from then.